The Denver Broncos wide receiver room could look entirely different in 2024, or it could look the same. We'll take a look at every side of the coin here on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
This past season left a lot to be desired about the Denver Broncos wide receiver position and has created some questions about the uncertainty of the position going into 2024. We'll review, we'll recap, and we'll preview ahead on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much, Broncos Country, for taking time out of your day to listen to us wherever you get your podcasts or to watch us on YouTube for free. Locked on Broncos is here for you every single day, all year long. Because for the true fan, there is never an offseason. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter from Mile High Sports, joined alongside, as always, by Sayre Bedinger, site expert, predominantlyorange.com. Sayre, 2023 was an enlightening year in some ways. You got a lot of clarity on the wide receiver position. There were some unfortunate bumps and bruises along the way and some sad revelations in terms of the overall production of the wide receiver position, specifically 2023. Interesting all across the board when you look at the wide receiver spot here.
It really was. I mean, battling through the trade rumors all offseason, right? Wondering who was going to even make up the wide receiver position. Like at one point or another, I think we explored every possibility for where could Courtland Sutton end up? Where could Jerry Jeudy end up? Is Tim Patrick going to be on the team? I mean, who are the Broncos going to have at wide receiver? But ultimately, they held on to their guys. And I think it paid off for them, really. I do. And I know that a lot of people are frustrated with that aspect of the team right now, and understandably so. But let's start with some good news, right? Obviously, Courtland Sutton, who wasn't traded, who is in the midst of his big money contract, had the best year of his NFL career, in my opinion. I know he made the Pro Bowl in 2019, Cody, but I just can't get over this statistic. When Courtland Sutton was targeted, the quarterback rating was over 120. I mean, that's phenomenal. That's the best in the NFL. Look it up. Go look it up. When the ball was going Courtland Sutton's way, the dude was making plays. He set a career high with 10 touchdown catches. I mean, it wasn't he didn't get 150 targets or anything like that. He wasn't out there catching 120 balls, but Courtland was, the Broncos' best offensive weapon in 2023. After, the previous year we had said Jerry Jeudy had taken that mantle upon himself, and I think that the Broncos have something going there with Courtland Sutton. He's a good player, and I think there's untapped potential with after the catch. You don't see a ton of just longer developing plays with Courtland. It was more so the point A to point B. You throw it to Courtland, he makes a play, and that's just how it was. But man, he was great in 2023.
No, he was by far, and he returned. He became the best version of himself so far in the NFL. And look, I think as we look on it like that, probably his production probably generated a lot of interest, and a lot of NFL teams have their eyes on it. And I'm sure when the NFL draft comes around, teams are going to say like, "Hey, do you want to part with Courtland here? We'll give you our pick, and you can move up." Or I guarantee you, those conversations will be had like from other teams. I don't think that Denver. I don't think Sean Payton specifically. I don't think Sean Payton would want to have an offense that doesn't have a guy like Courtland Sutton, a big body guy. And look, we saw like Little Jordan Humphrey is not the type of playmaker that Courtland is, even though he's got good size. And I think Sean values that tremendously. Best year of his career so far as a pro, has an opportunity to continue to evolve and get even better. And that kind of leads into our conversation here about Jerry Jeudy. I think overall, it was a disappointing season for Jerry. And I think so much of the frustration, the fan base right now, I don't know what your interactions have been, what you've seen on social media. I feel like there's a 50-50 split in the fan base on how they feel about Jerry. A lot of people say, well, Jerry's not a good wide receiver. I disagree. I think Jerry's a really good wide receiver. I think this year he didn't have a great year, and not all of it was his fault. I think some of it was a byproduct of quarterback play. I think byproduct of scheme, long developing plays. And look, Jerry's obviously got to make a couple plays. He had some negative plays himself. We can all acknowledge that. That's being objective. But to say Jerry's just a bad player, I don't agree with that notion one bit. It was just a disappointing season for him, especially considering how he ended 2022. And we're like, okay, hey, and Sean Payton, Sean's going to unlock everything in him. And Jerry really wasn't a big focal part of the offense, which to me was mind-blowing, and it was frustrating. And you can definitely tell throughout the stretch of games, Jerry was visibly frustrated as well, and rightfully so.
I think so. Yeah, and I get the same as you do, Cody, with, hey, there's one sect of the fan base that's still living in 2020 when Jerry Jeudy was a rookie, and they're still thinking that he's that guy that dropped a bunch of passes as a rookie, and that's just not the case. And so
Mm-mm.
I just feel I feel there's a big tension between the fan base about Jerry Jeudy, but I also feel like, man, he's got so much untapped. I hate to use the word potential. He's entering year 5 now, which is crazy, but I do think the Broncos made the right decision by picking up that 5th-year option on his contract, because can you imagine if we were going into this offseason and Jerry Jeudy was about to walk in free agency? I don't think that would be an ideal position for the Broncos to be in at all. And I look at Jerry Jeudy and I feel like he is the Broncos' craftiest player after the catch. I mean, when you look at this past season, other than Samaje Perine, who got, 800 opportunities as a receiver in the 2-minute drills, Jerry Jeudy was number 1 on the team in yards after the catch. So effectively number 2, but number 1 beyond Samaje Perine, who got a ridiculous number of chances. So Jerry's the number 1 player on the team in yak, and yet we feel all throughout the season like he's not getting enough of those opportunities. I feel like there is untapped potential yet. I think Sean Payton does like him. The Broncos could have easily traded Jerry Jeudy. Somebody would have been willing to trade. If the Broncos didn't like him, they would have just taken whatever they could get. They picked up his 5th-year option. I think they really like him a lot. But speaking of not getting enough opportunities, Cody, you and I have been talking about this guy a lot already this offseason, Marvin Mims. He needs to get more chances in the offense after 2023.
The most frustrating, I think, element and outcome of the Broncos receiver room, and has nothing to do with Marvin as a player. Like Marvin, as we saw in the speed, I mean, the Broncos on Instagram posted their most explosive plays. And of course, they show the clip of Marvin going downfield against the Washington Commanders, catching that touchdown. And I just commented and I said, wow, how come we didn't see more of that? Like, those looks dissipated. And then we saw a 49-yard bomb against the Chicago Bears that put the Broncos into field goal position to win that game. And all of a sudden, Marvin Mims becomes out of the Broncos offensive game plan, except out of double reverses or sweeps. And it's like, what are we doing here in terms of utilizing this player who has all the talent in the world? I think we'll see a better version of Marvin Mims here in 2024, but just explosive playmaker. You didn't get to see enough of it. And I don't know what the issue was, because we didn't get to see enough of it from Jerry as an explosive playmaker. We didn't get to see enough of it from Marvin. And that, to me, I think speaks to coaching. It also speaks to maybe some of the scheme or even quarterback play at times. You got to be able to find guys. And there were times where Marvin did come open. Jerry's come open. Guys just haven't seen him. That's obviously a realistic dynamic, but it happens for every team in the NFL. It's not just specific to Denver. So I think that was a big thing here. And I also think maybe probably the most underrated thing that we haven't talked about, I think Denver's most biggest, I would say, like, missing glare in terms of the wide receiver position. Man, I really wish we would have been able to see what Tim Patrick would have been able to do inside Sean Payton's offense, because that role that Sean had a very, very big role for Tim in this offense this upcoming season. Unfortunately, the training camp injury influenced that a little bit, and unfortunately, we didn't get to see him.
Yeah, and how different would it have been for Russell Wilson in general over the last 2 years to have Tim Patrick? Because we know those two built a lot of chemistry. So that's kind of an underrated factor in all of this. And yes, we know Tim Patrick is entering a year in which we're going to talk about his future plenty. He was, let's just say, in 2023, he was sorely missed. I quite enjoyed, though, seeing him on the sideline celebrating with all of his teammates. I think he's really invested in the Broncos. And so we'll get into that in a bit. I don't want to spoil anything too much about Tim Patrick and his future, what my thoughts are on that. We'll talk about that. But as far as other guys developing, I think Brandon Johnson is a keeper. He got opportunities in the offense. I think he made the most of those opportunities. I think he's only going to continue to get better. He's now going to be in his 3rd season. I like him a lot. I think also Lil Jordan Humphrey, I mean, as a blocker, and at times in the red zone, the play after the catch that he had against the Los Angeles Chargers late in the season, I mean, he's a good option to have at the back end. But will the Broncos be adding at the position? What are they going to do? What are the questions that we have this offseason, Cody? I'm excited to kind of break some more of this position group down.
Well, that's a great preview and a segue into what we're going to say coming up here on Locked On Broncos in just a moment. We have questions about the position wide receiver heading into the offseason. So many that we'll answer, including, will they look to add a player in NFL free agency or the NFL draft? We'll break all that action down here on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's Locked On Broncos is brought to you by our friends over there at Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. Check out the 2024 Nissan Rogue. It's perfect for city drives and great escapes. class exclusive Google built in. You're always updating your assistant to call on for almost everything. Gone are the days of connecting your phone. Google Assistant, Google Maps, and Google Play Store are built right into the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment center. And the 2024 Rogue is the perfect midsize crossover for your next adventure. Or you could go with the 2024 Nissan Armada. It will change what you expect from a full-size SUV. Picture a rugged 4x4 that can seat up to 8 in first-class luxury and style. Tow bigger and explore further in the 2024 Armada. Take the Nissan Rogue, the Nissan Pathfinder, or the Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure at shopnissanusa.com. Once again, that's shopnissanusa.com.
Are the Broncos going to stick with the status quo at wide receiver? Who's going to ultimately be back? Who's going to be throwing the ball to these guys? What are they going to do about contract situations, things like that? We're going to break all that down on this episode of Locked On Broncos. But before we do, I want to say thank you and give a shout out to all of you everyday listeners out there that make Locked On Broncos part of your day. Whether you listen to us anywhere that you get your podcasts or if you watch on YouTube, we appreciate you every single day rocking with this show right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. And as we break down this Denver Broncos roster, the wide receiver position is one in which I feel like you can see the need for improvement, a huge gap between expectations and reality, which is, I think, the tension, right, Cody? At this point, I think a lot of people are saying, well, you got 2 big money guys. You got a first-round pick. You have KJ Hamler was a failed second rounder. Now you've got Marvin Mims taking his place. And here's the expectations. They're all the way up here. And then reality is all the way down here, where it's like you can't even get Courtland Sutton the ball enough to where he's one of the top 3 guys on your team in terms of touches, or Jerry Jeudy for that matter, not involving him in the offense. Marvin Mims disappearing after week 2 and 3. I mean, there's just so many different things that I feel like the expectation versus reality is the tension here. Is the talent discrepancy as big, though, as we think? Like, do Broncos fans think too highly of the wide receiver position in terms of its talent? Is it really down here, or is it just there's so many different factors, Cody? But let's start with this. Let's start with this question. Are they going to look to add? Do they have a talent issue at the position?
I think Denver would benefit from like explosive playmakers. Like I look at Washington's wide receivers. If Denver could just get one of those guys to add to that room, like I'd be a super, super happy guy. But, more than likely, Rome Odunze is probably going to go in the first round. They have other guys like Polk and McMillan. I just don't know if Denver's going to add a guy in the NFL draft, though. I wouldn't be surprised. But then again, it's like, okay, if Denver takes a wide receiver in this year's draft, is that them saying anything like about Marvin Mims? I know there's going to be a lot of assumptions made about that, but I look at what happened with Marvin. I look what happened with Jerry, and even at times Courtland last year. I'm like, that's not their fault. Like that, the lack of production isn't necessarily their fault. I go back to this. Remember when Michael Thomas that season had 149 catches for the New Orleans Saints, and Sean Payton was just like, go to number 13, feed MT. Out of those 149 catches, I imagine like 75 of them were slants. How come we didn't see enough slants from the Broncos offense this year? And so many people are like, well, Russ didn't throw across the middle of the field. Folks, if you're on the outside as a wide receiver, you're usually lined up by the numbers or even sometimes outside the numbers. And even if you're inside the number a little bit, you're usually catching the slant where the hash mark would be. So I don't want to hear the middle of the field conversation about that. Sometimes it does take long developing. If it's going all the way across the middle of the field, unless the guy's in the slot, then it's a drag. Like we can call it a drag or a dig at that point. But we didn't just see enough like catch, 3-step slant, 1-step slant. We didn't see those stuff from the Broncos offense in 2023. And I think is where a lot of the production and the lack of playmaking is coming. And you got guys, I think, that could excel in that. But I do think it wouldn't hurt the Broncos to add a guy, whether it be in free agency, whether it be in the NFL draft, someone with speed, right? Another speed dynamic, though I do think it is worth bearing and keeping in mind. Philip Dorsett is still, he signed a future contract there. Could he maybe even have a role for the Broncos this upcoming season? Right now, I think when you ask fans and they look at it, they're like, Philip Dorsett, like what type of impact did he have? Doesn't mean that he can't have an impact going forward. I think we have to highlight that here as well. But I think that they should look to add a guy, and I don't think it's going to be indicative of, the NFL draft. Like, for example, like if you can get a guy in round 3 that you believe can be a playmaker for you, can have an impact, absolutely. I think the more competition you have, and look, we've seen this, Sayre, how many times over the course since 2020 have the Broncos had an injury to their top wide receivers? And then we're talking about, like, I know you've been a big proponent of banging the table, banging the drum for saying, like, Denver needs more wide receivers. They need to go out and get more guys. And they certainly haven't done that, but they've had some guys, as you mentioned, the Brandon Johnsons, who are now, I think, rising up, taking the next step. Little Jordan Humphrey, an underrated addition for them. I think that Denver has some good pieces there. I don't think it hurts to add another guy that can maybe have an impact and also be on a cost-effective contract for you. So I think that they maybe should do that here. And it also leads to some other questions as well that Broncos fans have. Will Courtland Sutton leave? Well, Broncos country, he's still under contract with the team, right? I think so much is contingent upon the idea, okay, when the Russell Wilson decision happens, there's going to be salary ramifications. Do you approach a guy like Courtland Sutton and say, Courtland, can you restructure your deal? I mean, I think you could. Like, it's different. It's not asking him to take a pay cut. He's just getting a different, like a prorated signing bonus, and then they're pushing some money down the road there. But Courtland did post like a cryptic thing on Instagram that's caused a lot of Broncos fans to go like, "Oh my gosh, is he saying he's leaving? He's not coming back?" I don't think that's the case there, but I'm very curious about your interpretation of it, because I felt like it was more of a, hey, whatever happens this year. I took it to the next level. That's how I read it.
Yeah, I did too. I mean, it's hard to read into those things too much because at this stage of the offseason, like, I mean, he has 2 years left on his deal, right? And it doesn't really make sense for the Broncos to just up and cut him after the season that they had. So the only realistic possibility is to say, all right, Courtland's coming off maybe the best season of his career. He's getting closer to the age of 30. Let's maximize value and trade him for the best deal we can get now. That might be their thinking. And it very well could be. But like you said, does Sean Payton want to go forward without that guy in his offense? So a true go-to guy with size who's proven that when you throw him the ball, I mean, he's going to make plays. So that really is a tough tension for me, but I didn't take it as a goodbye because obviously, I mean, he's got 2 years left on his deal. He's not a pending free agent. And so it's not like the Draymond Jones thing last year where we could all see the writing on the wall there. And we basically had said goodbye in November of the previous year to him. So it's just, it would have to be via trade. And if Courtland Sutton has been informed that the Broncos are going to explore a trade, maybe that's what he's talking about. I mean, you could read into it. You could put on the tinfoil hat if you want to, but I think you could do that with just about anybody on the roster. Now, I think another question too is, will a quarterback move elevate this wide receiver position? And how do you make sure that happens? Because that was the toughest aspect of the 2023 season, in my opinion. I brought up statistics like the Broncos being among the 5 or 6 worst teams in the NFL in terms of throwing for first downs last season. And the other teams that they were keeping company with are teams that are using 2, 3, maybe sometimes 4 quarterbacks throughout the course of the season. It was just an ugly look. You have Russell Wilson making X amount of dollars. We don't need to necessarily talk about that aspect of it, but he's making way too much money for you to be in the bottom, not even bottom third, like the bottom 5 or 6 of the league in passing first downs. That falls directly on quarterback and play caller, in my opinion. When you've got talent at receiver, does a quarterback change shift things? Because we did see Jarrett Stidham. He came in, he threw for more yards, per game than Russ, although it was only a 2-game sample. I get that. It's just, did that open up the passing game enough? Is a new quarterback going to do that? I wonder, Cody, because you've got these mouths to feed. The excuses are running low.
Well, and I think you look at I hate to bring up the Houston Texans again, but like, look what a guy like CJ Stroud did for a guy like Nico Collins. Nico Collins suddenly has emerged into a guy that's like, oh my gosh, like this guy's tearing everybody up. He tore up the Denver Broncos, almost had 200 yards receiving in that game. And in the playoffs, he was also very, very productive for them. He took off. I think it's got to be a mutually beneficial type of dynamic, right? I think you need a quarterback that's going to elevate and play to the strengths of your wide receivers. But I also think you need the dynamic where some of your wide receivers also play to the strength of your quarterback. But also, as you mentioned, that's where I think the issue for Denver in 2023 was not just, I think, you're missing a guy like Tim Patrick. You have talented guys like Marvin, and you have talented guys like, obviously Jerry in the slaughter on the outside. But the issue was what Sean Payton was calling offensively and quarterback play. They just weren't meshing well. And like everybody else was struggling. Like you look at Denver's pass production, Courtland, the top wide receiver. I mean, Adam Troutman, the top tight end, but didn't have a lot of yards at all this entire season. Primarily, it was Courtland Sutton, Samaje Perine as the top receiving options for Denver this past year. That is inexcusable, and that falls, in my opinion, that falls on the head coach and the play caller. That has to be addressed here going forward. But I think that they have to find a way to elevate the position. The quarterback's going to have to do it. And I think if Denver gets the right guy in place, I certainly think we can see that happen. And look, there's some guys in this year's NFL draft that I think would elevate and move the needle a little bit for the Broncos, but that's a conversation here for yet another day. Another thing that we're going to dive deep into, what is our outlook for the 2024 wide receiver room? I'm going to share my take. Sayre's going to share his take about what we think that room will look like come day one in September if everyone makes it healthy through training camp. You'll get that here on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos. Today's Locked on Broncos is brought to you by our friends over there at LinkedIn Jobs. At the start of the new year, every small business owner, they're asking themselves the same question. What's the one move that I can make that'll take my business to the next level in 2024? LinkedIn Jobs knows that your success all depends on the team that you surround yourself with. That's why LinkedIn Jobs has created the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates to choose from. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses, they get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So make sure you achieve your goals in 2024 with the right team member for your small business. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn also knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or the resources to hire. Thankfully, with LinkedIn, the process is intuitive. It's quick and it's easy. So check it out. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Today's Locked on Broncos is brought to you by our friends over there at DoorDash. Did the game go to timeout? It's time to order in with DoorDash. It's a halftime. That's ordering time. If it's the 2-minute warning, you got it. That's your cue to order in. You can order pizza, wings, soda, burgers, or even just the buns on DoorDash and get it all delivered without missing the game. Or you could kick back at kickoff with unbeatable deals on everything that you need for the watch party or the tailgate. And if you're in Denver, some of my local favorites that I have that I always go to, never go wrong with an illegal pizza burrito bowl or a double jam-packed protein burrito with chicken, with steak, with rice, and on top of that, a little bit of queso to go along with it. That's one of the things I usually get DoorDash directly to my doorstep. It's convenient, and it's something that helps me on game day. Get prepared before game day and stock up on your favorite appetizers and order all your tailgate gear on DoorDash. Then get ready to watch your team win. Get 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and enter code LOCKED23. Subject to change, terms apply. Once again, get 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and you enter code LOCKED23. As we jump into the fourth quarter action on today's episode, Locked on Broncos, sharing our outlooks on the wide receiver position here for Denver in 2024. What will it look like here as free agency creeps up the NFL draft? What will the room look like? Will there be changes? We'll share all that. We want to say thank you so much to everybody in Broncos Country for tuning in, making Locked on Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. Just a reminder, you can get us every single day all year long on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts entirely free. So take us with you on the go, whether you're going to work, whether you're going on a walk because the weather is getting nicer wherever you're at. Make sure you bring Locked on Broncos with you for all your Broncos coverage, content, and more. You get that here, the Locked on Podcast Network. Sayre, I want to open things up to you here, my friend, to kind of start off our fourth quarter portion of today's show. In terms of giving your take, what is your thought on the outlook for the wide receiver room here in 2024? What do you forecast maybe happening here with this group when the new season rolls around?
Well, I teased it a little bit earlier talking about the future of a guy like Tim Patrick. So let's start with him because I think that's a major question mark in my opinion, right? Everybody's going to be wondering, like, with his contract situation, the Broncos paid out a lot of his guaranteed money over those first 2 years where he didn't even play. And Tim did readjust parts of his contract to help the Broncos get some cap space the last couple of years. And he changed his number in the offseason right before the start of the season, right? When everybody's changing their numbers, he changed. Next time you see him out there, if he's out there for the Broncos, he'll be wearing number 12, not number 81. And to me, Cody, I think that's as clear of an indicator as any that I think he's going to do what it takes to be back with this team. I mean, he was out there rooting on his teammates every single game. I think Sean Payton, obviously, I think that group is going to love him. He's a veteran. He's had 2 years to recover, and I think it's worth the gamble to say, hey, let's redo the last year of your deal, and let's get you – he'll have to take a pay cut, no doubt about it. Let's get you back in the building. You've been rehabbing here. We know your medical history better than any other team. We know how to take care of you. I think he's going to be back this year. I do. And I just think there's question marks about the other guys like Courtland Sutton. Could he be traded? Absolutely. Should he be? I think that's worth debating. I mean, Jerry Jeudy, same question. Could he be traded? Absolutely. Should he be? I don't know. So those two guys could potentially net the Broncos that draft capital that everybody's talking about them recouping. But what would they do at the receiver position if they let them go? I could see this being a very similar group in 2024 as it was in 2023.
I think if there's a good enough plan for the offense, I don't think it would hurt to bring them back and look for Tim Patrick. I can tell you this, like toward the end of the season, he started doing a little more work on the side field, and man, he looks good. He's running good, sprinting, breaking down, decelerating, which really, when you talk about Achilles stuff, like sprinting, planting, cutting, and decelerating are probably the most important things to see, and making sure like he's doing his footwork. He's planting on the outside and he's making inwards cuts. He's making outwards cuts. He looked good, my friend. He really did. And so I think that he wants to be back. I mean, you mentioned it earlier here. Anytime that there was a big play, I think specifically when Courtland Sutton mossed L'Jarius Sneed in that game here in Denver when the Broncos snapped the streak, just how excited and animated he got on the sideline. Like his sideline reactions, I saw you tweet about it several times this season where you're like, Tim Patrick's celebrations are the funniest thing. Like they're the only bright spot about this game so far here for the Broncos. And I agree with you completely. Not only has he been a guy that's been rehabbing in the building, but he's also been mentoring and helping the younger guys. Like he's been big for Brandon Johnson because Brandon Johnson was playing the role that Tim was supposed to play this season. And Tim understood it. Tim picked it up. And I just remember the day of being there at training camp and watching him play. And I was like, oh no. And just, it was an unfortunate thing. Everyone in that locker room, I can tell you, Sayre, everyone was just devastated for a guy like Tim. And for that to happen to Tim 2 years in a row, one being the ACL, one being the Achilles. I think he's going to come back with a vengeance this year. I think he is going to be back. Sean Payton, I think, values him as well. And if, look, you mentioned the whole idea, like, could they trade Courtland? Like, yeah, that's probably something that will be discussed at some point. I know that there's going to be teams that are going to call, but if Sean Payton believes that Tim can be that guy on the outside, the big sizable guy, then, maybe they might make that move. Maybe they might have confidence in doing that. But I believe personally, my take here, I think Tim Patrick, Courtland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, and Marvin Mims are going to be the top 4 receivers for Denver going into 2024. And then you're going to sprinkle in guys like Brandon Johnson, maybe somebody else, and maybe even a guy we didn't talk about as well who missed all of last year, Jalen Virgil, who was having a really great preseason and training camp for the Broncos. He might be able to be that Marvin Mims role behind Marvin. He might be the 5th or 6th guy there. So something to keep an eye on here for everybody in Broncos country. I mean, where do you think about that? I totally spaced Jalen Virgil until I just thought about it.
Yeah, it's great to bring him up because obviously he's got tons of talent and he was on pace to make the roster once again as of that preseason game where he was fighting for that touchdown, which I still think he should have got that touchdown, Cody. I really do. But it's neither here nor there at this point, I guess. But I agree with you. He's got big time speed. He's obviously a great player after the catch. He can track the ball well downfield. He's a good return specialist. I've always been intrigued by Jalen Virgil. Great gunner on special. That was what really surprised us, I think, in that 2022 evaluation, was seeing late in the season that's going to give him an edge over other players going into this past season. But its injuries are unfortunate, and those were 2 kind of bigger, more underrated ones given what the Broncos endured at the position. So I think, yeah, you factor in these guys, you factor in the potential of draft picks, which could be. I mean, could it be a 1st round pick? Maybe. I mean, if like you said, if Odunze falls to 12, do you consider that? I mean, there's so many good receivers in this draft class, depending on where the Broncos are at the quarterback position, they could go as early as round 1 at receiver. And I think a lot of fans seem to be more so on board with that this year than in previous years, don't they? Because you said it, I've been pounding the table. Feels like the rest of the fan base is finally kind of catching up there. But at the same token, Cody, I mean, you could go any other round in this draft, and I think there's going to be guys that could impact your team instantly. We're seeing that more and more every year. Wide receivers are coming in at every round of the draft and making an impact on teams. It's not just Puka Nacua, it's Dontavian Wicks, who was outstanding for the Green Bay Packers this past year as a rookie 5th round draft pick, and there's Bo Melton, who is like, where's he coming from? A former 7th round pick. You found him off waivers. I think there's tremendous opportunity to upgrade if you just throw those darts in the NFL draft. And I hope we see the Broncos do that.
I'm not opposed to that as well. And I think so much of the conversation is so focused on where a guy goes. Oh, he's a 5th round guy. The expectations aren't that high. Like, ridiculous. Like, I think Puka kind of set that standard back. And there's guys consistent with here. I mean, you look at Julian Edelman, was an undrafted guy, right? And look what he was able to do overall throughout the course of his career. It's just about, it's not where you go, it's what you do with the opportunity. And I know as the NFL draft comes up, so much emphasis is on where a guy goes, but the reality is where he goes is not an indicator of what type of player he can be in the National Football League. And regardless of maybe how they can test poorly, like Puka Nacua, who they said didn't have a lot of great like cut and break speed, but he was one of the fastest players in the NFL this year in open space. That is huge to me. And you find the right system, you find the right environment, or you build that environment, and like, hey, we have a really good environment now. We add this guy into it. We know he's going to make us better, and we know we can amplify maybe some of his weaknesses because of our environment. That's the thought process that scouts, GMs, and coaches have when they look at a player. And I think you saw the behind the scenes. I don't know if you caught it, of the LA Rams when you had Snead and McVay talking about Puka Nacua and saying like this guy didn't test well, but like he's perfect for us. Like this is our guy. Like we can do it. And look what freaking happened. He had an unbelievable season. And I think if you have conviction, there's the word again, conviction, the way that those guys did in a guy like Puka, I think you can amplify. It doesn't matter where you get him. If you believe there's a guy in round 5 that can amplify and add value to your room, you take that chance 100% of the time. With that said, Broncos Country, thank you so much for tuning into today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Our next show that we're going to do is we look at our position review series and our outlook and forecast for 2024. We're going to take a look at the tight end position. Is this Greg Dulcich's last chance here with the Denver Broncos? We'll break all that action down and much more on the next episode of the show.